treat. I am Anita Robertson, a local farmer and also a member of this wonderful and awesome cooperative. My husband and I joined back in 2018, and we're so very proud of the work the co-op's done so far, and we look forward to many, many more exciting things. And if you haven't visited the store, please do so. It's located at 320 Jeff Daverson Highway. Now for some administrative tips. To enjoy tonight's presentation best, we recommend that you click on the speaker view in your upper right-hand corner of your screen for your best viewing experience. We also ask that if you have questions to place them in the chat box, because our speaker is going to be very busy pouring out so much information that you'll want to make sure she focuses on you. The session tonight is also being recorded and will be available on Facebook and YouTube shortly. Now for an introduction of our speaker. Janet Duberle is the program coordinator for Downtown Greens, and she's in charge of the food production gardens. And I'm
Hello, everyone.
The speaker's view. She's lived in Fredericksburg most of her life, except for a brief stint in Texas where she studied horticulture, and she has an enthusiasm for soil science and vegetable production. Her love for growing food is only surpassed by her love for talking about food. So you'll see that tonight. And Janet, take it away.
Thank you so much, Anita. It is such an honor to be here. Thank you all for showing up. Like she said, my name is Janet Duberle. Duberle, Anita.
I'm sorry. Duberle.
No one ever knows how to say it. I am the programs coordinator at Downtown Greens. I have been in this position for a little over a year. I am also in charge of all the food production gardens at Downtown Greens. If you're unfamiliar with Downtown Greens, we are at 206 Charles Street. You may just know us as the big gray house with the pink flowers painted on it. So if you haven't stopped by, I really encourage you to come by and take a look around, and we can always use volunteers as well. So hint, hint, everyone. Once I drop the knowledge on you, you can all come and apply it here at Downtown Greens. So without further ado, I'm going to get started here. Here we are. So today we are going to be talking about spring vegetable gardening. I want to cover a few things about what you can do now, what you can plant now, and then also some tips to keep your garden producing wonderful vegetables now and into the future. And once we enter the soil practice parts, I do tend to get very excited because that is my jam. So forgive me if I start getting a little fast. I'll try to keep it paced out and not get too excited and start talking about chemistry too much. So let's see here. First of all, I don't know how many of you have a garden already, if you're already gardening or if you just want to start now. But we're going to cover some of the basics. Obviously, you can garden straight in the ground. You can garden in buckets. You can garden in boxes, in pots, in grow bags. There are lots of different ways that you can grow vegetables right in your backyard. A few plants do have preferences. I cannot recommend growing watermelon from a pot on your patio because watermelon does take quite a bit of room. So you can see on this slide, I have listed some plants that really would prefer to go into the ground, like melons, pumpkins, squash, okra. Okra could grow in a pot, but it gets so tall that as far down you can get it, so you can reach the final okra in the end of the season, the better. In boxes, of course, you can have lettuces, any salad greens, kale, collards, lots of tomatoes. You can grow carrots. You can grow potatoes in pots and in boxes as well. The only steadfast rule I really do like to enforce is that if you are going to grow mint, it should definitely be in a pot because it will take over and spread like crazy. The only good thing about that is when you are weeding it up, it smells great. So there is that, but I do recommend keeping mint in a pot because, as I'm sure a lot of you know, mint will take over. So now I just want to talk a little bit about vegetable families. It's not terribly important to remember how to say each family or how to spell the family name, but knowing which vegetables share which families can really help when it comes to growing the food themselves. For example, nightshades, tomatoes, and peppers like a lot of the same things. Same with eggplants. The lettuce, artichoke, sunflowers, that is a family where they do diverge a bit, but for the most part, families, knowing which are in your legume families means that you'll know which plants are going to add nitrogen to the soil, which we will get into a bit more later. And then your nightshades, your cucurbits. It's just nice to know the families so that A, if you lose your label on your transplant, you can kind of recognize the leaves and which family they're going to be in. And B, they all kind of tend to have the same needs when it comes to water, heat, and light, and nutrients. So just having a general idea of what's in what family is a really good starting point for everyone. And I put this really complicated looking chart here. This is not for you to read on the screen. I just wanted to show you that for the most part, if you are in doubt about when to plant something, the Virginia Extension Office has this wonderful spreadsheet. Well, wonderful if you like spreadsheets, which I kind of do, that will show you which vegetables can be planted when and how long it will take them to grow, and then when they can be harvested. We are in growing zone 7A. So the country is broken down into different planting, harvest, hardiness zones, and we are in 7A, which I've always said is the best one because we are warm enough that we can get 2 growing seasons in, but we are also not so warm that we have fire ants. And if you have ever tried gardening in a place with fire ants, it is literal torture. So we are really in a sweet spot here in 7A. If you do use this chart, a good thing to keep in mind, and you can kind of see it here, is that they are judging everything as if the last frost is between April 15th and April 25th. And normally that is very true for this area. Going by that, that means we have already passed our last frost date and we should get no more frosts. But if you remember last year, if you were trying to grow anything last year, we actually had a freeze in the middle of May, which had me running out to the garden, holding all my grandmother's old 70s bed sheets to cover up my tomatoes and peppers to protect them from the freeze. So even though this chart does say that the last frost will be mid to late April, you still want to keep an eye out on the weather forecast because it's Virginia and the weather changes every single minute. So this is just a nice general guide that I like to use. And then here are some plants. So these are the plants that, according to that chart, are things you can put in right now. So it's not too late at all for a lot of things. Beans, cucumbers, I actually just planted those within the last week. Eggs, plants, melons, okra, onions. The vegetables that have the asterisks beside them, those are things that are really going to want to be transplanted, which means they should have been started inside several weeks ago and kind of babied into plants. And then once it gets warm enough, you take those baby plants outside and put them in the ground. If it does not have an asterisk, it can be direct seeded. It doesn't have to be, not all of them have to be, but that's just something to keep in mind. It is a bit late in the season now to start seeds inside to be transplanted later, but there are seedlings available in almost every store you go to now, and the farmers market and the CSA also have seedlings. So it's not too late to get your tomato seedlings and get them in the ground. So that being said, we're talking about direct seeding versus transplanting. And there is no hard and fast rule for most of this. These lists I created in just what I tend to do when I am gardening. So I have said that beans, I direct seed, which means I put the seed directly in the ground where it's going to be grown. But I do know a lot of gardeners that start their beans inside and then transplant them. The only ones that you really want to make sure you put straight in the ground are going to be the carrots and beets, rutabagas, turnips, the things that actually produce their fruit in the ground, or vegetables in the ground. They're not going to want their roots disturbed. So you're really going to want to direct seed those exactly where they're going to go. And normally I will direct seed anything that can be direct seeded because I'm kind of lazy. So if you start your seeds inside to be transplanted, you have to start them and keep them warm and then put them in a bigger pot and then harden them off, letting them get used to outside before planting them in the ground. And that's a lot of steps. So if I can skip those steps to save my time and energy and money, I will. So if it can be direct seeded, I will direct seed it. Some things like onions, you technically can direct seed them, but they are notoriously hard to start from seeds in the ground. This year is the first year that I've actually successfully started my onions from seeds in the ground where they will be growing. And I'm just gonna pat myself on the back for that. I was squealing with excitement when I saw them pop up because I have tried before and I haven't had any success. And I've had to go out and get what are called onion starts and put them in the ground. And when you're planting seeds, it's important to know that the back of the packet usually has the information you need. It'll have how deep to put the seed and how far apart to put the seeds from each other. But sometimes you get seeds from friends that have no directions. So if you're ever confused about putting your seeds in the soil, whether it be direct seeding or starting them inside, the general rule is that the seed should be planted 2 or 3 times their width. That should be their depth. So if they are a sunflower seed, you would put it in about 3/4 of an inch deep, because that is 3 times their width. And now this is when I start getting really nerdy, guys. So I apologize in advance. So if you are going to grow in the ground, it is really wise to know what type of soil you have. Soil consists of sand, silt, and clay. Those are the 3 things that are in your soil. And aside from that, then you'll have the organic matter, the water, rocks, things like that. But if you can find the ratio of your sand, silt, and clay, that will actually tell you a lot about how much you need to water, how often you need to water, and how quickly nutrients are leaving your soil or how long they'll stay in your soil. So I have put here a very general and kind of fun way to find out what soil type you have. It's you just get a quart mason jar, fill it halfway through or halfway up with your soil. Make sure you knock off any plant matter and pick out any rocks. Put about a teaspoon of liquid dish soap in there. Fill the rest with water. Shake it as hard as you can. Make sure it's nice and mixed up, and then set it down for about 24 hours. And if you'll do this, it's actually really fun for kids to watch this too. The sand, which is the largest, heaviest particle in the soil, will almost immediately settle to the bottom. And then the next few hours, the silt will settle because that's the second largest. And then the 24 hours is for the clay, which takes a long time to settle because it is the smallest particle. And so you'll be able to understand how much of your soil is sand, silt, or clay. Sand, because it's so big, the spaces between the particles are actually going to be larger, which means that water will move much quickly through sand. It'll evaporate much quicker from sandy soils, whereas clay soils, the water moves very slowly through the soil and stays in the soil longer. So if you have a high sand soil, you'll know that you might have to water more often than if you have a high clay content. If you have high clay content, you'll have to water less, but when you do water, you have to water slower to make sure the water has time to absorb into the ground and not run off the sides. And this will also tell you a lot about how quickly the nutrients go away a lot quicker, whereas clay clings more tightly to the nutrients. So it's just a fun little thing. If you really want to get nerdy, you can Google this jar test and they will actually show you how to measure each one and find the exact percentage. And you can use this very confusing looking triangular chart to find out your exact soil type. But that's not really necessary for most home gardeners. It's only if you want to geek out about your dirt, which I do recommend that as well. Let's see here. So aside from the soil type, a lot of people like to know their pH and their nutrients. In Virginia, our soil tends to be more acidic, which means it has a lower pH, which is great for things like blueberries and azaleas. Those really do like a more acidic soil. But most vegetables like it between 6.5 to 7.5 pH. Again, this isn't super, super important for the home gardener to know. It's really only if you're getting really into your soil and really into your vegetables, or if you're having issues repeatedly growing in the same spot, you might actually want to send in a soil sample to the extension office, and they will take it, they will test it, and they will send you this really cool piece of paper back that has your soil's pH and then all the pertinent nutrients and what levels you have of those. And it can be interesting, but again, for home gardeners, it's not really necessary unless you're having issues with your soil. It might be a nice thing to find out what's going on. I do love doing soil tests though. I feel like a scientist, even though I don't actually do any of the science part. I just read the paper. And no matter what your pH to an extent, and no matter what kind of soil type you have or what your nutrient levels are, everything can be made better with lots of organic matter. Organic matter is just essentially plant matter, straw, grass, leaves, anything that's organic getting in your soil that's not sand, silt, or clay. It has so many uses. It adds nutrients. It helps retain water. It helps battle compaction. So adding organic matter to your soil several times a year will really help. If you have a low pH, organic matter will help you grow the vegetables at like a higher pH. If you have nutritional deficiencies, organic matter will really balance those out and make sure your plants are taking up the nutrients they need. So I cannot stress organic matter enough. When I was studying horticulture, no matter what class I was taking, from trees to vegetables to even landscaping, every exam really talked about organic matter. It was really drilled into me. And I hope that today, when we walk away, you guys will all just be thinking of nothing but soil and organic matter. So to add organic matter, compost obviously is a great source. Apply it at least once a year in the spring or fall. And if you got enough compost, you can apply it twice a year, and that's double your fun. I like to mulch with straw when I'm gardening around my squash plants. As soon as they're large enough, I will take straw, not hay, but straw, and put it around the squash plants, around the bean plants, tomatoes. This not only will add organic matter as it breaks down, but it'll also help your soil retain its moisture, so you won't have to water as often. And then I also like to use rabbit manure. There are obviously other types of manure out there for gardeners, but rabbit manure is the only animal manure that you can add directly to your garden without it burning up your plants. If you were to use horse manure or chicken manure, something like that, that would burn up your plants. Those need to age and be composted in a pile before adding. So rabbit manure is not only super cheap, but you can just put it right in your garden as is, and it'll really make a big difference. And then also cover crops. We will talk a little bit more about cover crops later. Earlier, I mentioned that everything in the legume family, the bean family, adds nitrogen to the soil. That makes it an excellent cover crop. So in the fall, once my garden has wrapped up, I will plant a bunch of peas and clover, which is also in the legume family, vetch, which is kind of like a weed around Fredericksburg, but it's really good. It's also in the legume family, and legumes add nitrogen to the soil in a form that the plants can easily take up. So it's a really important cover crop, and it keeps your garden beds covered which helps them maintain their nutrients and helps them be healthy. And then once you're ready to plant in the spring, you can just take your hoe and chop it right into the soil, which will add even more organic matter. And then also all that nitrogen is in there as well. So between compost, mulching, manure, and cover crops, that adds a lot of organic matter, which will really help your soil year after year. And each year you do it, your garden will get better and better, in theory. Unless you have a freeze in the middle of May that kills your tomato plants. Some other healthy soil practices that will help is adopting a low or no-till practice. By definition, no-till gardening means that you don't till the soil any deeper than 6 inches. So you can see one of our volunteers, Aviva, there. She is tilling with a hoe, but that hoe is only 4 inches. So technically what she is doing is considered a no-till garden. I don't like that definition because it is tilling it. So I call it low till, but I don't make up the rules. I just break them all the time. So every time you till your soil, you are losing nutrients and you are damaging your soil structure. So tilling as little as possible is a great way to keep your soil very healthy. Of course, avoid walking on your garden beds, avoid setting any heavy furniture or anything heavy on your garden beds, because that will compact the soil down, which will make it hard for air and water to move through the soil when it's all compacted down. And then also when, like we said earlier, when your bed is not in use, putting in some cover crops to keep it covered and healthy and holding on to those nutrients. And then hopefully the cover crops will also be adding some nutrients in as well. I think I did pretty good on the soil section without geeking out too hard. Maybe. So once you have your garden in, you've got it all planted, your seeds have come up, your transplants are thriving, and then all the bugs will show up and be like, hey, this is a really great garden you have here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. That's usually where we want to start using some pest control. So knowing that the bugs are going to show up, it's a good idea to go ahead and start planting flowers when you're planting your vegetables. That will deter a lot of the bugs. And this will also keep you from having to use any pesticides like neem oil, which will save you time and money and effort. So some of the ones that I use most often are borage, which will, if you intersperse them with your tomatoes, will fight off the tomato hornworm, asparagus beetle, and the squash bug, which we had a lot of squash bugs last year. So this year I've doubled my borage. Marigolds are a classic. They not only deter bugs on the surface, but they also deter nematodes, which are microscopic organisms that live in the soil, which 80% of them are either good or neutral, but about 20% of them are actually very bad for your plants, especially if you're trying to grow heirloom plants, heirloom tomatoes specifically. They will burrow into the roots and feed off your plant, and it won't kill it quickly, but it'll keep it from thriving and producing. So planting marigolds will actually deter those nematodes in the soil away from your plants. So I always, when I'm growing tomatoes, there's a marigold by every plant. Nasturtium is a great one, not only because it's beautiful and it obviously deters a lot of pests, but it's also 100% edible, and it's very spicy. If you've never had it, the blooms, the leaves, the stems, the roots, very spicy, like a horseradish or like a spicy mustard spicy, kind of wasabi-ish. And it's just a gorgeous plant. So we'll be growing a lot of nasturtium this year as well. And then you can go down the list, chives, which are a double bonus because not only will they deter things, but they are also delicious. Catnip will deter all of those pests and attract cats to your garden. So it's a double-edged sword on that one. Rue is another good one. And there are a lot more. I didn't want to list them all, but a lot of your herbs, your culinary herbs, are actually really good to have interspersed with your vegetables just because their odor alone will either mask the scent of your plant to the pests or at least deter the pests with their scent. So flowers and vegetables. make for a beautiful garden. Flowers alone, unfortunately, don't do the trick all the time. So other forms of pest control is getting a bucket of soapy water and picking them off by hand. Removing eggs. This is particularly important for squash bugs. I have added a picture there of assorted little nests of eggs of squash bugs. And then attracting predatory species is also a good one to have. And doing that is just as simple as having a wide variety of things growing in your garden, and that'll attract a lot of species. The trap crops is also a really great idea. Trap crops are crops that you plant near your vegetables that is more attractive to the pest than the vegetable itself. With trap crops, you will see that they do get infested with the insect, and you do have to pull them out when they are infested and take them away. But it's a really good way of like distracting the pest and getting them away from your vegetables and be like, hey, look at this great plant that you love even more. Don't you want to eat that plant instead? And they will go for that plant. And depending on which vegetable you're trying to keep the pests away from will depend on what trap crop is more suitable. So I think the blue Hubbard squash is actually a really excellent trap crop. So if you were trying to grow a bunch of yellow squash or zucchini, having 1 or 2 blue Hubbard squash plants growing near that bed will attract the pest to that one instead. And then once they infest it, you can yank it out and get rid of it. I wouldn't recommend putting it in your compost because then the eggs are there for next year. So I would throw it in the garbage. So aside from bugs, what else wants to kill your plants before you can eat them? There are a lot of fungal and viral diseases. And no matter what you do, occasionally you're going to get a disease. But there are some things you can do to really try to lessen the chances of that happening. Airflow is very important to not having fungal issues in your plants. With large squash plants, I had very large squash plants last year that produced a lot of leaves. And they were actually having some fungal issues because there were so many leaves, the airflow was not good in them. So I had to go out there and just prune some of the larger leaves out. And that also helped with the pollinators. Thinning my squash leaves out actually helped the pollinators find the blooms better, since the blooms are all at the bottom of the squash plant. So that had double goodness with it. Anytime you have a sick plant, and even if you don't know what it is, anytime you touch it with a tool or your gloves, you want to make sure you thoroughly clean those tools and those gloves so you're not passing on that virus to another plant or that disease to another plant. Anything you do trim off that plant, or if you take that plant out completely, again, don't put it in your compost pile, put it in the garbage, because you don't want that coming back next year to haunt you. One of the weird things I do like to tell people is that you should not have any tobacco products being used near your nightshades. Tobacco is in the nightshade family, and that does get a virus called the mosaic virus, which can then be passed on to your tomatoes. Hi, sorry, I have people walking by. Hi, how's it going? It can be passed on into your tomatoes, peppers. And so anytime somebody approaches the garden with a cigarette or a vape pen, I immediately rush out and chase them off, because I do worry about the mosaic virus taking out my nightshades. It doesn't happen often. It's very rare, but for some reason that's one that stuck with me this whole time. And I'm very diligent about making sure there's no tobacco products near my nightshades. And then another thing, and this one is pretty simple, is just don't overwater your plants. Overwatering them makes them more susceptible to diseases and can really lead to a lot of fungal issues. So people, if they don't understand how to water, they tend to just water very often to make sure their plants don't go thirsty. But overwatering can be just as damaging as underwatering. So it really is important to learn your plants and your soil to know how much water to put in. And then at the end of the day, the best advice I can give any gardener is to take heart. We all fail, and there are things that are our fault, and there are things that are not our fault. I started seedlings last year and they were not thriving. So I have put some fertilizer on them, some NPK on them, and they were under low lights. And I forgot that you shouldn't add phosphorus to things that don't have a lot of light because they get leggy and soft. And I lost almost all of my seedlings last year because of that. So there are mistakes. No matter how long you've been gardening, you will make mistakes, or the bugs will come and eat your land, or the grasshoppers will come, or the diseases will come. So always take heart. Gardening is a gamble, so you definitely have to try again when you do fail. And honestly, I tell people that if you aren't killing plants, then you aren't gardening hard enough, because you should really be pushing the envelope as much as possible, which means that you will fail more often. But gardening is so rewarding, even with the failures. The things that don't fail, or the things that finally start, like onion seeds in the ground, are so rewarding, and they will really fill your heart up and your belly up. And it's really just a wonderful thing to do. So, and luckily at the bottom, if you do fail, we do have the co-op. So if my tomatoes don't make it, at least I have somewhere where I can get local organic tomatoes, which is a nice little safety net for everybody. And so that's pretty much all the basics I can think of. This is one of my favorite quotes. If you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. But if you teach a man to garden, then the whole neighborhood gets tomatoes. And this is always very true, because, you know, if you've ever gardened, or if you've ever lived near a gardener, they're always like, do you need any squash? Do you need some tomatoes? Do you need squash, tomatoes, zucchini, okra? Because we always get excited and plant a lot, and then we get to share it, which is one of the best things ever. So that's pretty much it. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? I don't even know what my time is. 34 minutes. I didn't geek out too much.
We do have some questions, and we thank you so much for that awesome presentation. Andrew Craig provided one question, and in regards to soil testing, he wanted to know, how much does it cost? And I guess I wanted to add to that, how should a gardener collect their soil samples?
Those are excellent questions. The last time I did a soil test, which was last year, it was $10 per test. For a small garden, you won't need that many tests. I usually do one test per growing bed, so that way you know with each bed what your nutrient levels are. And the box they give you is just about this big, square, so it's not a lot of soil. There are really detailed instructions that they give you as well, but ideally you just kind of kick the dirt off the top of where you're, or not the dirt, I'm sorry, the plant matter. Make sure you clear away any plant matter. Dig about 6 inches deep in a few different spots in that bed. Mix that soil together, pick out rocks, and then you pack it in that little box. You want to do this when your soil is dry. And really, you want, anytime you touch your soil, you want it to be as dry as possible. You don't want it too wet. Then you ship it off and wait a couple weeks, and they send you an email with all the attachments that has all your nutritional information. It's really exciting.
Awesome, awesome. We have a question from Janice Ford. If you're doing container gardening, can you also use flowers to aid and mitigate pest? How would you do
Definitely.
that? Mm-hmm.
Yes. Most flowers, they can get their own pots. And so you can just put the pots nearby, because it's what's going on above ground, which is what's having the effect on the pests. The only exception to that I can think of is marigolds. But if you are planting in containers, chances are you're using a potting mix from the store, or a potting mix from somewhere, and that's not likely to have any nematodes in it. So unless you're using field soil in the pots, like soil that you've dug from the ground, which is not really recommended, but some people do, you don't have to put the marigolds in with your tomatoes. You can grow the flowers in separate pots and just have them near the plants that you're trying to protect.
Okay. We have another question from Tony Zavanya. You mentioned that mint is a great pot herb, but what other veggies and herbs are best to start and stay in a pot? And she was asking for those of us that have limited yard space.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. For the most part, any vegetable that's not going to get too huge can be grown in a pot. Like I said, the watermelons, their vines can get 20 some feet long. So yeah, yeah. And they will need a lot of nutrients, more nutrients than a pot of soil can hold. But if you name it, tomatoes, carrots, potatoes, you can even grow squash in pots. I do recommend, if you're growing these things in pots, to try to have the pots as full as possible. As soon as your soil levels drop, the pots are then providing walls, which do restrict airflow. So for things like squash, you do want a nice large pot. 5 gallons would be a minimum for the larger vegetables. Any herbs, any culinary herbs can definitely be in pots. Lettuces, kales, collards, leafy greens can all be done in pots easily. Celery, I've seen pretty much everything grown in pots. I've even seen watermelon grown in pots, but it was kind of crazy.
Also, Richard asked, can he plant his tomatoes now in the ground? I know the weather's been kind of crazy. Would
The
you
weather's been
recommend?
crazy. Yes. You can. You can plant them in the ground now after they've been hardened off. If
Okay.
you have started them yourself, you're going to want to put them outside during the day and then bring them in at night for maybe about a week or so and slowly let them get used to being outside before you actually plop them in the ground. But if you've got them from a store or a garden center, they've already been hardened off and you can go ahead and put them in the ground. Just keep your eye on the weather.
Okay. For a lot of people that are just beginning to garden so that they're not overwhelmed with the whole process, what are some of the easy vegetables and fruits that you recommend that they start with?
I like to recommend sugar snap peas to be the first one. They're easy and they're quick. So you get kind of instant gratification.
Mhm.
Radishes are another good one to start with because you just pretty much sprinkle the seeds and then within 50 days or so to 80 days, you have a bunch of radishes. Tomatoes are actually surprisingly easy to grow. So if you want to get a tomato, start too. But really, at the end of the day, your favorite vegetable is the one you should start with.
Okay. We have another question. What plants can I get 2 crops out of here in Fredericksburg? And when should I do the second planting? I guess the succession planting.
Oh, I see.
Mhm.
My personal experience here in Fredericksburg is I put in the cold weather crops. I'll grow the tomatoes and the zucchinis and all those peppers, hot weather crops in the spring and summer. And then as soon as fall hits, that's when I start putting in my kales and cabbages, turnips, the crops that can withstand cooler weather, especially with it's going to be the cold crops for the most part. The Brassiaceae family, which you can look at the other slide and see a list of those. Those tend to bolt quickly in the heat, so I always save them and put them in the fall, and then you can harvest them. I'm still harvesting carrots that I planted last fall, so you can put them all in the ground in the fall and do it that way.
Let's see, from Adam, he asked, any good vegetables to plant if you travel regularly during the growing season?
Ooh. Uh, well, you're going to need to have somebody water them, especially probably in July when we usually have it's hot and dry in July.
Right.
I'm trying to think of vegetables that don't need a lot of water or attention. And right now, artichokes are coming to mind, um, which they're a funny plant to grow. But for the most part, if you do travel a lot, I would just have a watering buddy come by and water and tell them to keep the eye on the weather, and if it goes a few days without rain, they come by and give you a nice water on the garden.
As far as garden location, can you give some tips on, if you have a lot of trees in your area, things that you can still grow?
Sure. So when a vegetable needs full sun, that
Mhm.
means it needs at least 6 hours of sun. So if you're not getting 6 hours of sun where you want your garden, You're going to want to look at vegetables that maybe don't need full sun. Those are going to be, again, a lot of your cole crops. Lettuces don't like a lot of sun. Kales, cabbage, a lot of those you can grow with less sun, and it works out just fine.
Okay. And Rich asked another question. Can he get 2 crops of string beans here?
Interesting. 2 full crops of string beans. I have not tried that here. So far, my string beans last well into the end of the summer, so I've never planted 2 crops worth. But with beans, they don't need high heat. They'll actually stop producing when it gets too hot. So I could see, especially here in Virginia, when we have those longer spring, summer, warmer falls, that you could easily get 2 crops worth of beans in early spring that will grow and then stop producing when it gets too hot. And then once it cools down again, you can plant some more. But if you can keep your bean plants alive when it gets too hot, just keep them alive. As soon as it cools down again, they'll start producing again.
Oh, awesome. If you have problems with squirrels wreaking havoc in your garden, do you have any tips?
What you do is you get a BB gun. No.
Humane tips.
I see. With squirrels and with groundhogs, I kind of have the same, I don't want to call it a trick because it only works sometimes, is I feed them. I feed them something else. Okay. So that way they don't want to get in my garden. Squirrels, I give them a lot of peanuts. The groundhogs, whenever I harvest something that is not fit for human consumption, I'll just throw it towards the groundhog hole. So they kind of have like a food delivery service. So that way they don't feel the need to come into my garden. Okay. But that's the bane of every gardener, is the squirrels and the groundhogs and the rabbits. Shake your fist a lot sometimes helps.
Okay. Now, I understand that Downtown Greens has an educational component. Could you share some of the things that they do and how people can get involved?
I would love to. Thank you for asking that. We have this summer, we are having a educational series, an environmental educational series. So once or twice a month, we have donation-based classes, and you don't have to donate to attend. We actually have one tomorrow, which is going over some of the same stuff we went over today at 2:00. If you follow us on Facebook, we announce every month what's going on for the next month. If you go to our website, you can sign up for our mailing list. We only send 1 email a month, so we won't bombard you with emails, but in that email, it'll be the newsletter, which will also announce what's going on. We have a mushroom workshop series where we grow mushrooms once a month. We have exercise series where we have professional yogis coming and teaching you how to do yoga, hip hop step aerobics. We have invasive species coming up. An edible weed walk will also be next month, where we have a naturalist coming to take us around the garden and show us what weeds we can eat and how we can eat them. So definitely follow us on Facebook and sign up for our newsletter, and you'll see all the classes that we'll have entailed.
And for people who would want to get involved with Downtown Greens, how would they volunteer?
Now, come right now. Every Thursday afternoon from 3 to 6, and every Saturday morning from 9 a.m. to noon, we have what is called open volunteer hours, which you don't need to sign up. You just come, drop in, and we will hand you a pair of gloves and tell you what to do. And as the season progresses, when we have a lot more to harvest in the vegetable garden, I will actually be sending out emails to our volunteer list asking for help in the mornings. We will need help also with our free farm stand that we have every Thursday starting in June, where we give the food that we grew plus food that other farmers grew to our neighbors in need for free. And if you want to be on the volunteer email list, you can just email me at programs@downtowngreens.org, or you can go to our website and email through the website, and I'll get it through there as well.
Okay. Greens. All right. And let's see here. Well, we're almost out of time. What I'd like to do now is unless people have more questions, you can keep them rolling in the chat. And I wanted to announce some of the upcoming events for the Fredericksburg Food Co-op. On May the 4th, Luke Fowler, who is a worker owner of the Equal Exchange Fair Trade Cooperative, will be having be highlighted, and he'll be giving us a better understanding of the 4 metrics of mission, quality, service, and price that go into a delicious equal exchange product that we see on the shelves of the co-op. So if you're interested, we put in the chat a link to the events that are coming up, and you can go online and register there, and that'll be May the 4th from 6 to 7. And starting May the 1st, we're going to be having Food for All, and the co-op's going to be having a 5K, and you can participate either virtually or in person, and you register at the link, and sponsors are also welcomed. The co-op also has a book group, and that'll be meeting on Thursday, May 13th at 1 o'clock or either at 7 o'clock. And that's also online. And on Wednesday, May 19th online, we'll have Dr. Jessica Gordon Newbaum, and she's going to tell an inspiring story of how cooperatives have been a powerful vehicle for African Americans to band together to meet common needs and strengthen community. And let me see if we have any more questions. Oh, we did have a tip from Ed Kenyon about squirrels. They don't like hot or spicy food. So if you're having problems with squirrels, I guess a little cayenne pepper goes a long way to chasing them out of the garden. And again, we want to thank Janet Duberle so much for coming tonight, and we hope that everyone will join us for future events and take some time to go down and visit Downtown Greens and take time to volunteer and contribute to all the wonderful programs that they offer, and just be involved in our community.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And we hope to see you on May the 4th for the next program event. And have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.